Today's message is a matter of perspective. And we've come off a great series with Josh of Not Alone. And I'm going to build upon the foundation that Josh had left for us. On May 22nd, he started off the series with, I need nothing. Basically, if we have Jesus in our life, we're fully equipped to do battle here on earth. But we often get distracted by things of this world, and we become discontented with what God has provided. And through that discontent, it allows us to lose focus of the blessing that we have. On June 12th, he gave us the guardrails of life. And then on 6/19, if you were here, if you remember, we set up a little bistro table here, and Josh challenged us. Yes, it was funny. It was a great illustration of the table that God prepares for us, but be careful who we invite to that table. That's right, yes. And last week, what did we learn? If Josh invites us to go on a hike, just say no. I don't want to be wandering on a mountaintop knee-deep in snow. But the reality of that message is, it's funny that I was talking about the illustration of snow, is watch the wake that we leave as we go through life. But there's two of his messages I want to drill down on. One is, on June 5th, he asked, where are you? And he was asking in that context, as we go through our struggles of life, is, where are you, God? Where are you in our life? And then on May 29th, he said, go in the distance. The opportunity to rest, restore, and repair ourselves so we can endure the long battle. Since I'm building on Josh's message, guess what? Psalms 23. We're going to read this together. I'm not going to do this by memory. We saw how Josh struggled with that. He has a lot more brain cells than I have. So we're going to read together. So let's go through Psalms 23. So, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lay down in green pastures and leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod, your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Ever, ever. As we say in Boston, ever. Okay. So anyways, this is a significant day for me. This is the first time I've had the opportunity to be in the pulpit since Janet passed. And matter of fact, today is exactly 4 months. And so this message that Josh had gone through was very timely for me. As on verse 4 is, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Well, the reality of this walk and this journey is I'm still in the valley. I think at times I've passed through it, but I find myself at times I'm still in it. But the reality of going through this walk is I'm not alone. No. We know we can always call on Jesus Christ for his presence. But part of the reality is we focus on the rod and the staff. It's something physical. And for me, as so many of you were part of that, is that going through the walk of the shadow of the valley of death, that you guys became the arms and legs of Jesus Christ for me.
Well, we love you, Pastor Dave.
Thank you, and it's felt, and I just hope I can return it. I don't know about you, but when I think of a valley, where I grew up in the Northeast, back in Boston, our valleys are green and pretty lush during the summertime. And even in the wintertime, they could be full of pine trees, so they're not so barren. But I think the illustration that the psalmist has given for us is something that we often experience here on the West Coast. It's going to be this rugged, narrow wash that's just sand and rocks and boulders. And when we're walking through this, it changes. You know, the perspective of time. We're going to be walking through these valleys often. And from the perspective of heaven, our life is nothing but a valley. The whole journey of life is a valley. And so we may walk successfully through the valley once, but like the washes that we experience here on the West Coast, the spring rains are going to come through and change those paths. So we're constantly, when we're in a valley, God is focusing our attention. I can't just blindly walk forward. I am watching each step that I am taking. Where am I planting my next step? Where is my foot being placed? And it's during these valleys that God is focusing our attention.
That's right.
We have to depend on Him where each foot is placed before we can move forward.
Amen.
Josh, in his illustration last week, and we know how this is, when we get to a mountaintop, the vantage point is vast. And so it allows our vision to go wide. So with that wide vision becomes the distractions of this world. We start picking up things that are going to burden us. In the illustration of being careful of who and what we invite to sit at the table that God has prepared for us. So think in terms that when we go through the valley, there's a purpose for God focusing us. It's what are we doing? We know that surely, as we saw, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Through the psalmist there, he is telling us that this valley of death that we're going to go through, the shadow, it's going to be long-term. It may be reoccurring. It could be a lifetime. But the thing is, there's a length of time that when we need to rest up, it's because we have to rest up for the long journey. It's not just an occurrence. When things are going well, we kind of relax, we kick back. And it's like, okay, God, I got this. We start doing things on our own. We're not reliant on God to guide us for the next step. We will get all puffed up in pride, and we're going to go and pass through this without God's help. We see in Hebrews 12:1, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with the endurance the race that God has set before us. So again, we know that this is not just a single occurrence, that we are going to be running this race. For me, part of the focus is the grief, is the loss. And it did draw me in closer to God, is because I was asking the question, why? There's a period where you weep for the loss, as I know many of you did also for Janet and how she impacted your life. So part of that, me looking for the answer, is something that I prepared for men's breakfast one Tuesday morning, was the 3 times that I found in the Bible when Jesus wept. In Luke, we're told that Jesus wept over Jerusalem. God had given Adam and Eve that perfect garden in perfect communion with Him. When they sinned, they lost everything. But God, in His mercy and grace, began preparing a way to rescue mankind. He raised up a people and gave them the land that He would be their own. In that promised land was God's city, Jerusalem, the city of peace. God first gave his people a garden, and next he gave them a city, a place to dwell, a city on the hill, shining as a light in the land of Israel. And yet, in their disobedience, they failed to keep it holy and set apart for God's purpose. In Luke, Jesus looked out upon God's city, and just in the times in past, Jerusalem was now a city controlled by a pagan world power. In Luke 19, verse 41, we read, "When he approached Jerusalem, he saw the city, and he wept over it." Jesus loved the city so much and the purpose of the city that it broke his heart that he wept. Another time when we see when Jesus wept is in the Garden of Gethsemane. We know what that's all about. He knows he is being prepared for his sacrifice on the cross. We know Jesus was praying to his Father, knowing that soon he was going to be nailed on the cross. In that period of extreme anguish, we read in Luke 44, in being in agony, he was praying very fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling down upon the ground. Some will debate, because we really don't know, if he was weeping tears. But we know with that state of grief that if he was literally weeping drops of blood from his pores, that his very essence was broken in grieving. So with such intense anguish, we can only imagine what he was feeling. I can't imagine that this grief was not accompanied with tears. But the thing that we do know, that he was in fact grieving. So Jesus wept, knowing the high price that he was going to pay for our sins. We know Jesus wept when he saw the city of Jerusalem. And the third time I found where Jesus wept is when he found out about his friend Lazarus. If you have your Bibles with you, let's open to John 11, please. Start right in verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was the Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. So the sisters sent word to him, saying, Lord, behold, he who you love is sick. But when Jesus heard this, he said, the sickness is not to end in death, but for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Interesting response. Then, after this, he said to the disciples, let's go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you are going there again? Jesus answered, and listen carefully. Jesus answered, there are not 12 hours in the day. If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. Does this not remind you or recall of what we just read in Psalms 23? He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Again, he's reminding the disciples, but if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. Continuing verse 11, we read, this he said. After that, he said to them, our dear friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go so that I may awaken him out of the sleep. The disciples then said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken to him of his death, but they thought he was speaking of literal sleep. So Jesus said to them plainly, "Listen up, knuckleheads. Lazarus is dead. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Therefore, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, so that we may die with him." So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb for 4 days. But now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. Martha, therefore, she had heard that Jesus was coming, went to meet him. Listen carefully to the interchange that Martha had with Jesus. Mary stayed at home, but Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you'd been there, my brother would not have died. Even now, I know whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection, the life, and he who believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world." When she had said this, she went away and called Mary her sister, saying secretively, "The teacher is here, and he's calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and was coming to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and consoling her, when they saw that Mary had got up quickly, went out, and they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews who came were also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and was troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. Question for you. Do you think Jesus weeps for you?
Yeah, he does.
Continuing in John here. So the Jews were saying, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not this man who opened the eyes of a blind man have kept this man also from dying?" So Jesus, again, being deeply moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and a stone was laying against it. And Jesus said, "Remove it." Remove the stone. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he's been in there for 4 days." So I'm going to stop here for a second and go back to what Josh said, not alone. Josh had challenged us when that Sunday, "Where are you?" It was us crying out, "Where is God?" at a time of need. I want to turn this around and challenge us this way. Put yourself in the situation. You were one of the grievers who were following Mary and Martha back to the tomb, and here we have the encounter with Jesus. Are you one of them sitting there going, "Only if he was here, the person who could restore the sight of a blind man could have saved Lazarus"? But more interesting, were you like Martha, who just a few hours prior to this, her faith being tested? In verse 27, she said to him, responding to Jesus, Yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son, and even he who comes into the world. Are you folks catching this? We go through our periods of grief when we're in the shadow of the valley of death. We believe who God is, who Jesus is in our lives. But here we have Mary and Martha. Their life is about to change. And we've all been experiencing the challenge of change in our lives. We've been challenged by the pandemic, challenged with stresses at work, relationships, regardless if they're friends or family. We deal with births and how that changes life. We deal with deaths. Routines have been disrupted. We deal with financial issues. We struggle with church at times. Just like Martha, these things are surely too great for God. I believed. I believed. I believed. God's looking for our presence. Where are you? Do you believe? Not past. Do you believe now as you go through the valley that you trust God to get you through this? James 4:8, come close to God and God will come close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world. How many people here remember New Coke? Okay. See, what I was really asking is how many people are over 50? So a lot of people, New Coke, what are you talking about, Dave? Well, that was, of course, one of the big marketing flops of my lifetime. Coca-Cola messed with their secret formula, and the public's reaction to it was swift, it was severe, and they quickly had to reverse course. How many people here are addicted to Nutella? It's that cocoa hazelnut, kind of like a peanut butter spread type thing. Yeah, I had no, it never was in my radar. Jen and I had an opportunity about 6 years ago to go to Italy, and we had good friends of ours. Their daughter came up to us, would you please bring back a jar of Nutella? Because in Europe, it's totally differently formulated than what we have here in the States. And it's made by this Italian candy company that actually their very first product was Nutella. And there's only 7 ingredients in it. And doing a little research, basically the same 7 ingredients are used in the product worldwide. There's slight differences in the formula, but basically it's the same thing. It's sugar, it's palm oil, hazelnuts, which they consume 25% of the world's production of hazelnuts. So me not being crazy about Nutella, evidently I'm in the minority. Coca, milk, soy, and vanillin. In doing the research, as I said, it's pretty much the same formula with just some tweaks here and there, depending on what country it's being sold in. What we find is that a couple of decades ago, they decided to reformulate it slightly for Germany. And what they did is they reduced the amount of cocoa that was in this. And when I'm talking about reducing, it's 7 point something of the total product has cocoa in it, and they went from like 7.3 to 7.2. Well, the German public just, this is awful, this is terrible, it's not as dark as it used to be, it's not chocolatey enough. And so again, it's just that we don't like change. For me, something that hits home for me, I love chocolate milk. It's like at nighttime we want that snack, a nice cold glass of milk, Hershey syrup, mix it up.
Oh, yeah.
You go to Costco, though. Costco has this, no, it's not disgusting, something called Hershey Simply 5. So you go to Costco, you get a better buy. So trying to beat inflation. So I go and get the double pack. It will last me a couple of months. It's simply cane sugar, organic inverted syrup, water, cocoa, and natural vanilla. Hey, Hershey's doing me a favor. They're taking out all the artificial ingredients. But the reality is, I like the junk better than the pure. Is that not us illustrate our life? It's like we pick up the garbage that we accumulate through life and we have a preference for it. Yeah. And so here we are. The bottom line is, face it, we do not like change. That we continue to pick up things. When we get to our mountaintops in life, we start picking up things that God has to cleanse us from. And how does he do that? He puts us through these stress tests. We go through these valleys as a sense of purging. It's narrowing my focus as I go through a crisis in life. I'm relying more on God than me for things to do. How am I going to cope? And this, I believe, is one of the key things when we go through the weeping process, the grieving process. We are very focused. Things in life quickly narrow down, and our dependency on God becomes real because we know we cannot do this without him, so we're more focused. In Genesis, we read in Genesis 35, verse 2, so Jacob told everyone in his household, get rid of all your pagan idols, purify yourselves, and put on clean clothing. Continuing now back to our story of here we have Jesus telling the followers here in verse 39, Jesus said, remove the stone. Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time there'll be a stench, for he's been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they removed the stone, and Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you, for you have heard me. I knew that you would always hear me, but because of the people standing around, I said it, so they may believe that you sent me. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. The man who died came forth, bound hand and foot with wrappings, and his face was wrapped around with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him, let him go. Again, the symbolism here for us as we go through this period of grief. Think how sins, things of this world, bind us. And it's through the grief of us going through these valleys that God affords us the opportunity to cast off those things that bind us. Again, you think of what Jesus did here. Jesus could have easily done this without having the witnesses. He didn't have to be told where Lazarus was. He could have easily rushed as soon as he received word to be there to keep Lazarus from dying. But for us, it's to take the thing from I have believed to an active verb, I believe. This was for the followers. Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he had done believed him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them the things that Jesus had done. Again, are we going to actively participate in the changes that God's impacted in our life when we go through these trials and struggles? Or are we just going to be a witness? It's like, okay, we went through this unchanged for no purpose. There's no greater love that we will ever experience for the love that the Father has for us as one of his creations. He sent Jesus to live among us and to die for us. That's John 3. It is the love of the Father for us that has made alive through Christ in his life, death, and resurrection. It's all phases that we have to experience. We're the ones that should have hung on the cross. Jesus, however, was the only one who could take it upon himself for our sins, pay the penalty for it, and secure forgiveness for eternal life for us. He lived a life that we could not live, and he died the death that we should have died. And in his life, Jesus experienced all the pain and the suffering that we know. Jesus wept. Therefore, when we weep, we can find refuge and strength in him, and that we know that he is here presently. Regardless of our troubles, regardless of the valleys that we're going through, God is our refuge and strength, a very pleasant help in trouble. That's Psalm 46:1. So again, reflecting on Jesus' pause when he heard the news of Lazarus. Martha, like us, declared she had faith. Jesus wanted her to have this faith. He could have very easily have done these things without a doubt that this was God's divine intervention. He proved that God can conquer death, but so can we, if we believe. So right now, folks, if you are in this stage of life where you're struggling with your walk, come forward. We'll have prayer partners up here. If you need to rededicate your life, or if not had that opportunity to be baptized, we're always prepared for baptism. Seek me out. Seek out one of the pastors, one of the prayer partners. Please be baptized. We're not designed to go through the struggles of life by ourselves. God has a purpose for all these struggles. It's to focus and get our strength from him, not to rely on ourselves. Let's go ahead and close in prayer.